The iron latch on the side gate of 218 Birchwood Lane had a specific sound when it was flipped open from the outside, a sharp, hollow clatter of metal against metal that carried cleanly across a quiet backyard. On a still afternoon, the kind of sound that didn't belong to the rhythm of the neighborhood, the kind that made birds stop mid-sentence and a jazz trumpet fade into irrelevance. Marcus Cole heard it before he saw anything. He was standing at the offset smoker he'd positioned at the far edge of the patio, the one he'd spent 3 weeks deciding exactly where to place so the smoke would drift away from the back windows rather than into them, a small domestic calculation that had given him a disproportionate amount of satisfaction because it meant he was thinking like a man who lived somewhere, not a man who was passing through. The brisket had been on for 10 hours. The hickory chunks were doing exactly what they were supposed to do, releasing a slow, rich, almost sweet smoke that had been drifting across the freshly cut grass of his yard, and he suspected across Margaret Clifton's yard at 216 Birchwood as well, though he'd been too occupied with his own peace to think much about her. The afternoon light at that hour in May did something particular to the grass in Pinecrest Estates. It turned everything a deep, almost theatrical gold that made even a modest backyard look like something out of a magazine, and Marcus had been standing in the middle of that light with a pair of stainless steel tongs in his right hand and absolutely nothing pressing on his mind for the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, and then the gate opened. He turned slowly, not out of fear. Fear had a different texture, one he knew intimately from 2 deployments to places where turning too fast or too slow could determine whether you went home, but out of the particular deliberate calm of a man who had learned that the first 2 seconds of any unexpected situation belonged to assessment, not reaction. 2 officers came through the gate. The first one moved like a man who had already decided what he was walking into before he'd seen it, heavy-footed chest, forward right hand, already resting on the butt of his sidearm with the casual possessiveness of someone touching something they considered theirs. The second officer was younger, and he moved differently, slower, his eyes doing the actual work of looking around the yard rather than locking onto a predetermined target. And Marcus could see in that younger man's posture the specific discomfort of someone who already knew something was wrong but hadn't yet figured out what to do about it. Marcus set the tongs down on the side table. He did it slowly, deliberately, without breaking eye contact with the first officer. He turned his body to face them squarely, and he opened his hands, palms out, and he stood exactly where he was. Officer Brett Gallagher looked at the tall, broad-shouldered black man standing beside the smoker in his own backyard on a Sunday afternoon, and he saw exactly what 14 years of a particular kind of policing had trained him to see. He did not see the Bronze Star sitting in a shadow box in the study just inside the back door. He did not see the Purple Heart beside it. He did not see the deed recorded 19 days ago at the Franklin County Recorder's Office with the name Marcus James Cole printed across the top in clean black ink. He did not see any of it because he hadn't looked and he didn't intend to, and that more than any single thing that followed was the decision that ended Brett Gallagher's career. What he couldn't know, what he had no framework to consider in that first moment, was that the man standing calmly in front of him had once directed close air support in the Korengal Valley at 2 in the morning, while 2 of his Rangers were bleeding 20 meters away. And that man had done it without raising his voice, and he had brought everyone home, and he had been decorated for it, and he was not under any circumstances going to be rushed by a man who couldn't manage the basic emotional discipline required to walk into a stranger's backyard without already reaching for his gun. Brett Gallagher thought he was walking into a trespassing situation on a quiet Sunday afternoon in Pinecrest Estates. He had no idea he was walking into the worst mistake of his life, and that the recording of it was already running. Marcus Cole did not talk about the war the way some men talked about it, which is to say he did not talk about it as the defining fact of his existence, the thing that explained everything that came before and after the wound you held up to show people why you deserved their patience or their respect. He talked about it the way you talk about a city you lived in for several years with some affection, some specificity, some things you'd rather not revisit, and a fundamental understanding that you were different for having been there, whether you wanted to be or not. What he talked about readily, freely, with genuine enthusiasm was meat and temperature and smoke and time, because those things were reliable in a way that very few things in his experience had turned out to be, and because the discipline required to do barbecue correctly, the patience, the attention to incremental change, the refusal to rush a process that needed exactly as long as it needed, and not a minute less, was a discipline he recognized from his military training and found genuinely comforting in a civilian context where so many things seemed to operate without any coherent logic at all. He had grown up in Dayton, the second of 3 children. His mother, a school librarian, and his father, a man who could fix any engine manufactured before 1990 and had opinions about everything else. He had been a good student who was also restless in the specific way that certain kinds of intelligence express themselves when the container is too small. And at 19, he had enlisted in the Army not because he lacked options, but because he wanted to test something about himself that he couldn't name precisely but understood intuitively. He found out during Ranger School. He found out again more definitively in Mosul in the winter of 2007, when a convoy he was riding in hit an IED, and he spent the next 40 minutes managing the aftermath of the explosion and the firefight that followed, with a clarity of mind that his commanding officer later described in the after-action report as extraordinary under extreme duress. He served 2 tours, the first in Iraq, the second in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, where a mortar round came down 40 meters from his position during a night patrol and sent a piece of hot metal through his left shoulder at an angle that missed the subclavian artery by approximately the width of a finger, a fact the trauma surgeon at Bagram had mentioned with the particular casualness of someone who had seen enough near misses to have recalibrated their definition of fortunate. The scar it left was a raised silver-white line about 4 inches long that he could feel when he pressed his fingers into the hollow just below his collarbone, and he neither hid it nor displayed it. It was simply there, the way all the significant things from that period of his life were simply there, present but not controlling. He left the Army with the rank of Staff Sergeant, subsequently commissioned as a captain through Officer Candidate School, before his second deployment with a Bronze Star, with Valor Device and a Purple Heart, and a body that worked mostly the way it was supposed to, and a mind that he'd done the serious, unglamorous work of keeping functional through therapy and routine and the specific grounding practice of early mornings and physical discipline. He had spent 4 years after his discharge working as a logistics coordinator for a defense contractor in Columbus, living carefully, spending almost nothing on himself, putting money away with the focused patience of someone planning something specific. The something specific was 218 Birchwood Lane, 4 bedrooms, a good-sized yard, mature oak trees that threw shade across the back patio in the afternoon, and a neighborhood with quiet streets, and the kind of settled permanence that felt to a man who had spent his 20s in environments where permanence was a concept rather than a reality, genuinely precious. He had used his VA loan and everything he'd saved, and he had sat at a closing table 19 days before this Sunday afternoon and signed his name to a document that said this ground was his. And when he had walked through the back door that first evening and stood in his own kitchen, he had stood there for a long time without moving, just feeling the stillness of a place that belonged to him. And he had felt something he could only describe as the particular relief of arriving somewhere you'd been walking toward for a very long time. He'd bought the smoker as a housewarming gift to himself. It was the only extravagant purchase he'd made in the entire process. He'd driven an hour to pick it up from a shop that specialized in competition-grade equipment, and the man who sold it to him had talked for 45 minutes about airflow and firebox design and the structural differences between various species of hardwood, and Marcus had listened to every word with the attention he usually reserved for pre-mission briefings, because the man was clearly someone who cared deeply about something he'd spent years understanding, and Marcus respected that wherever he found it. He'd woken up at 5 that Sunday morning to put the brisket on because 10 hours at a low temperature was what the cut required, and he wasn't going to apologize for that to anyone. He'd stood in his kitchen in the dark drinking the first coffee of the day, listening to the neighborhood wake up slowly around him, and he had thought with some clarity and real satisfaction that this particular morning in this particular kitchen, with this particular thing to look forward to, was what he had been building toward, and it was exactly what he'd hoped it would be. The smoker had been doing its work for 9 hours and 53 minutes when Brett Gallagher flipped the latch on his gate. 2 streets over, in Unit 412 of the Pinecrest District Patrol Rotation, Brett Gallagher was in the middle of explaining to Danny Pratt, for approximately the 5th time in 4 months of riding together, the philosophy of policing that had guided him through 14 years without what he considered to be a serious mistake. It wasn't a complicated philosophy, and Gallagher didn't dress it up in complicated language. He was not an educated man in the formal sense, and he was not embarrassed by that education. In his view was mostly what people substituted for actual experience when they didn't have any. What he had was 14 years of pattern recognition, which he valued considerably more than a degree. And the pattern recognition had produced a worldview that was simple and, to him, self-evidently correct. Pinecrest Estates was not just any neighborhood. It was a specific place with a specific character built up over decades by people who had invested in it, maintained it, protected it from the kind of slow deterioration that had taken other Columbus suburbs and turned them into places you didn't take your family on a Sunday afternoon. Gallagher had been assigned to the Pinecrest district for 8 years, and in those 8 years he had developed what he described as a comprehensive knowledge of the neighborhood's human geography, who lived where, what they drove, what their routines looked like, what belonged and what didn't. That last category was the important one, what belonged and what didn't. He said it to Pratt plainly, without any apparent discomfort, the way you state a fact, rather than advance an argument. Some people belonged in Pinecrest, and some people didn't, and his job, his actual job, the one that mattered beyond the paperwork and the traffic stops and the domestic calls, was to notice the difference, before the difference noticed you. He wasn't talking about crime. He was talking about presence, about the way a neighborhood maintained its integrity, about the invisible gates that kept a community coherent. Danny Pratt was 24 years old and had been out of the academy for 4 months, which was long enough to understand that surviving a probationary period required a functional relationship with your training officer, and short enough that the things he'd learned in the academy still felt true rather than naive. He sat in the passenger seat with his eyes on the street ahead and said nothing, because he had not yet figured out what to say when Gallagher talked like this, whether there was anything that could be said that wouldn't either compromise his position in the unit or compromise something more fundamental that he hadn't yet named clearly enough to defend. His stomach had tightened the first time Gallagher talked about it. It tightened every time after. He had learned to hold that tightening somewhere internal and quiet and not let it reach his face. The dispatch call came through at 4:47 in the afternoon. A 1010 suspicious individual. The caller was a Margaret Clifton, 216 Birchwood Lane, reporting that the backyard of 218 Birchwood, a property that had recently sold, contained a man who, in her description, did not appear to be the new homeowner. The dispatcher's voice carried the very slight professional hesitation of someone relaying a description they found insufficient. Gallagher picked up the mic without asking what the description was. He responded, put the car in gear, and turned onto Birchwood without a word to Pratt, and Pratt watched his hands and his jaw and understood that his training officer had already decided what they were going to find before they'd turned the corner. Pratt said quietly that maybe they should run the property records first to check who actually owned it before they drove up. It would take 90 seconds on the MDT. Gallagher glanced at him with the specific look he reserved for things he found self-evidently stupid. He had a witness report, he said. He had a trespassing in progress call from a 30-year resident of the street who knew every face in the neighborhood. He didn't need the county clerk to tell him what Beatrice Gable's 30 years of local knowledge already confirmed. He told Pratt to keep his eyes open and let him do the talking. Pratt looked out the passenger window and said nothing, and the knot in his stomach pulled tighter than it had ever been in 4 months of riding with Brett Gallagher. Margaret Clifton had lived at 216 Birchwood Lane for 25 years, which was long enough to feel a proprietary relationship with the street that she would not have described as proprietary because she would not have recognized the word applied to her own feelings. She thought of it as investment. She had put 25 years of her life into this neighborhood. The HOA meetings, the block parties, the complaints filed about improperly maintained hedges, the careful attention to who moved in and what they brought with them. And she believed, without examining the belief very closely, that this investment gave her a particular authority to notice when something was wrong. She was not a cruel woman. She brought casseroles to sick neighbors and donated to the church food bank, and had genuine affection for the Stevensons next door, who were good people and had been good neighbors for 11 years. She did not think of herself as someone with prejudice, a word she associated with ugliness and small-mindedness and rural roads and historical periods that were, she felt, firmly behind them. She thought of herself as someone with standards, which was different, though she could not have explained clearly what the difference was. When she saw the smoke coming from the backyard of 218 Birchwood, a property she'd watched with interest since the for sale sign had gone up and then come down, wondering who the new owners would be, hoping for a family, maybe a couple, someone who would maintain the yard and understand the neighborhood. She went to the window on the second floor that looked out over the shared fence line. She saw a man she did not recognize. He was tall and broad-shouldered and black, and he was doing nothing more alarming than standing beside a large smoker with a pair of tongs. But he was not anyone she had ever seen on this street, and the house had been sold, and the moving trucks had not come, and so she had reached a conclusion that felt to her not like a racial conclusion, but simply a logical one. She did not go outside and introduce herself. She did not walk to the front door of 218 and knock. She picked up her phone and dialed 911, and she explained her concern in the careful, measured tone of a woman who considered herself reasonable. And when the dispatcher asked for a description, she gave one. And when the dispatcher thanked her and said someone would be sent, she felt the specific satisfaction of a person who has done their civic duty. She watched through the upstairs window as the patrol car turned onto Birchwood from the far end. She watched it stop in front of 218. She stepped out onto the small second-floor balcony, where she kept her potted geraniums, and stood with her arms crossed, and her geraniums bright red around her. And she watched the two officers disappear down the side of the house, and she stood there and waited, because she wanted to see how this resolved. She would stand there for 11 more minutes before understanding in a slow and dismantling way that it would not resolve the way she had imagined. Gallagher didn't go to the front door. He didn't ring the bell, didn't knock, didn't announce himself or his purpose or his presence in the manner that might have resolved the entire afternoon in approximately 45 seconds. He went straight down the right side of the house along the narrow concrete path between the siding and the fence, with Pratt behind him, and Pratt noticed several things during that 30-foot walk that he would describe later with precise detail. In a deposition room, the gate was closed and latched. There was no sign of forced entry anywhere on the property. The yard visible through the gaps in the fence showed no evidence of disturbance, and Gallagher had his hand on his holster before they reached the gate. The latch flipped. The gate opened. They stepped into Marcus Cole's backyard. The smoker was running at the far edge of the patio, and the smell that came out to meet them was extraordinary. Deep hickory, the particular sweetness of long-rendered beef fat, the faint char of good bark forming on a brisket that had been smoking for nearly 10 hours. It was objectively the smell of a Sunday afternoon going exactly right. Pratt noticed it. He noticed the jazz speaker on the patio table currently quiet. He noticed the neat lawn recently cut, the new garden beds along the back fence, the careful arrangement of patio furniture. He noticed all the things that told him someone lived here. Someone had thought about this space and arranged it deliberately. Gallagher looked at Marcus Cole and said loudly enough to carry across the yard, "Hey, drop it. Drop what's in your hand right now." Marcus had already been processing the situation for the 2 seconds between the sound of the latch and the officer's appearance around the corner, 2 seconds that in his experience were sufficient to read the basic architecture of a dangerous moment. He saw Gallagher's hand on the holster. He saw the forward lean of a man who had already decided the situation was hostile. He saw Pratt behind him moving more slowly, eyes doing the actual work of assessment. He registered the fear beneath Gallagher's aggression because he had seen enough genuinely dangerous men to understand that this was not one of them. This was a man performing authority because he needed authority to be real, which was in its own way the more unpredictable kind. He placed the tongs on the side table. Slowly, clearly, he turned to face them fully and he opened his hands. "Can I help you, officers?" His voice was exactly the same register it would have been if he were answering the door for a package delivery. Gallagher heard it, and something flickered behind his eyes. Not recognition, not reconsideration, but a specific irritation that Marcus would later understand was the irritation of a man whose script required a different opening line, a man who needed panic or aggression, or at minimum visible discomfort, and was getting none of those things and didn't know how to proceed without them. Marcus kept his hands open and his eyes level, and he let the silence sit there between them for exactly as long as it needed to. "Step away from the grill," Gallagher said, moving further onto the patio, "hands where I can see them." Marcus took one step back. Not a retreat, a tactical repositioning that kept him out of arm's reach while maintaining an open, non-threatening posture, and he crossed his arms over his chest and he said, still in the same even register, "I asked how I can help you. You came through my locked gate onto my private property. I'm standing in my own backyard, so I'd like to understand what's happening here." "This isn't your backyard," Gallagher said. "We got a call about a trespasser. You need to provide ID right now." "What's the basis for the stop, officer?" Marcus asked. "I haven't committed a traffic violation. I haven't been observed committing any crime. I'm standing on private residential property at a smoker that I purchased on a patio that I own in a yard with a fence that I am responsible for maintaining. Under what specific legal authority are you detaining me?" Gallagher's face changed a slow deepening of color that started at his neck and moved upward. "We have a witness call placing a suspicious individual on this property. That's my authority. ID now." "Your caller made an error," Marcus said. "I've owned this house for 19 days. My name is Marcus Cole, and the deed for this property is registered in my name at the Franklin County Recorder's Office. My identification is inside the house on the kitchen counter. I'm not going to retrieve it because I do not consent to this detention. But if you contact your dispatcher and request a property records check on 218 Birchwood Lane, this will resolve itself in approximately 90 seconds. From behind, Gallagher Pratt spoke up tentatively, but he spoke. "Sir, we can run the address through the MDT in the car. It would take a minute." "I've got a witness report," Danny Gallagher said, not turning to look at the younger officer. "I don't need the county clerk to tell me what B. Clifton already confirmed." "Respectfully, Officer," Marcus said, addressing Pratt directly now, which he had decided was the more productive audience, "a neighbor's phone call is not a warrant, and a neighbor's assumption about who belongs in a particular property is not probable cause. I understand you are in a difficult position here. I want you to understand that I am not going to become aggressive. I am not going to resist anything unlawful that happens to me tonight, and I am not going to help you build a case against me for standing in my own yard. I am also very clearly not going anywhere." The smoker made a soft, settling sound, wood adjusting to heat the particular percussion of a long, slow burn, and the smell of the brisket was everywhere, rich and warm and entirely indifferent to the conversation happening 10 feet away from it. The afternoon light was doing the gold thing it did at that hour, and somewhere 3 yards over a dog was barking at something inconsequential, and the world was going about its business, and Marcus Cole was standing in his own backyard being asked to justify his presence. Gallagher stepped closer. "People like you," he said, and he said it the way you say something you believe so thoroughly that the saying of it feels like observation rather than opinion, don't just close on houses in Pinecrest. I'm not buying the homeowner story. You're going to produce identification right now, or I am going to place you under arrest for obstruction." The camera mounted at the northeast corner of the house, installed by Marcus on his third day of ownership, as a matter of professional habit and personal history, recorded every word at 4K resolution with clear directional audio. It had been running for 9 hours and 57 minutes. Marcus looked at Gallagher for a moment without speaking. Then he looked briefly at Pratt, whose face had gone very still in the way that faces go still when a person realizes they are watching something that cannot be taken back. Then Marcus looked back at Gallagher. He said nothing about the camera. He filed the phrase away. "People like you," with the careful precision of a man organizing evidence, and he waited to see what came next. What came next was Gallagher moving into Marcus's personal space. Not dramatically, not violently, but with the deliberate encroachment of a man who has learned that proximity is its own form of pressure, that making yourself physically large in someone's field of vision is a tool that usually produces the desired result, which is a flinch, a step back, some visible acknowledgement that the other person is not in control here. Marcus did not flinch. He did not step back. He stood exactly where he was and let Gallagher come to him, and Gallagher stopped when there were perhaps 18 inches between them, which was close enough to feel aggressive and far enough to maintain technical deniability. And he said, "Last chance. ID or cuffs. Your call." Marcus turned his head slightly and addressed Pratt, not Gallagher. His voice was very calm and very deliberate, and carried the specific quality of a person who is speaking for a record rather than a conversation. "Officer, I want to state clearly for the record that my name is Marcus James Cole. I am the owner of this property at 218 Birchwood Lane, Pinecrest Estates, Columbus, Ohio. I closed on this property 19 days ago through a VA loan processed through First Federal Mortgage. My attorney is Raymond Holloway of Holloway Grant and Associates in Columbus. I have committed no crime. I am committing no crime, and I am not consenting to any search or detention. I am stating this clearly and calmly so that there is no ambiguity about what occurred here tonight." Gallagher's hand went to his cuffs. "Turn around." "On what charge?" Marcus asked. Still calm, still level. "Trespassing, failure to identify, failure to comply with a lawful order." There was a pause, very brief, in which Marcus looked at Gallagher with the particular steady attention of a man who is making a decision about something, and then he said quietly enough that it didn't sound like a performance, and loudly enough that the camera's directional mic would pick it up without difficulty. "Write it down exactly as you said it, Officer Gallagher, every word, because someone is going to read it out loud in a federal courtroom, and it needs to be accurate." Something moved across Gallagher's face, a flicker of something that might in a different man have been reconsideration. It passed quickly, overridden by the momentum of a situation he had set in motion, and didn't know how to stop without losing something he couldn't afford to lose, which was the sense that he had been right to come here and right to do this and right about what he was looking at. He pulled the cuffs off his belt. "Turn around. Now." Marcus turned around. He put his wrists back without being told because he had made the decision. The same decision he had been making for the last 15 minutes, a decision built on the same fundamental clarity that had kept him and his rangers operational in environments far more genuinely dangerous than this suburban backyard, that the only battlefield that mattered tonight was a legal one, and you don't fight legal battles with your body, you fight them with your precision and your patience and your attorney. And he had already thought of all three. Pratt put the cuffs on Marcus's right wrist first, and his hands were not entirely steady, and Marcus felt the slight tremor in them and understood what it meant, not cowardice exactly, but the specific conflict of a person doing something they know is wrong because the alternative requires a courage they haven't yet determined they possess. As the cuff closed over his left wrist and Pratt stepped back, Marcus turned his head just enough to see the younger man's face. "Pay attention to everything that happened here tonight," Marcus said quietly just between the two of them. "Every word, every sequence, the time that gate opened, what was said, and in what order. You're going to need to remember it accurately, and you're going to be asked to choose between the accurate version and a convenient version, and the choice you make is going to define what kind of officer you are. That's not a threat, that's just true." Pratt said nothing. He looked at the ground for a moment, and then he looked up, and something in his expression had shifted, not into comfort or resolution, but into a kind of grim acknowledgement that told Marcus the words had landed where he'd intended them to land. Gallagher grabbed Marcus by the arm and turned him toward the gate, and they walked across the patio and past the smoker, which was still doing its slow, patient work. The temperature gauge reading exactly where it should be, the brisket progressing through its final hours of transformation from a tough, unforgiving cut into something extraordinary, unaware and indifferent to the fact that no one was going to be here to tend it for a while, and through the gate and along the side of the house and out onto the front walk. The neighbors had begun to appear the way neighbors appear when something unusual is happening on a quiet street, not rushing, not gathering, but drifting to front porches and pausing at mailboxes and finding reasons to be in front yards that had nothing to do with the actual reason. A man named Gerald Beaumont, who lived at 220 Birchwood and had waved to Marcus across the fence 3 times since he moved in, was standing on his front steps with a pair of garden shears hanging from one hand, completely still, watching with an expression that Marcus, even in his current situation, could read clearly as troubled rather than satisfied. On the second-floor balcony of 216, Margaret Clifton stood with her arms still crossed, and Marcus did not look at her because she was not part of the calculation he was running right now, and he did not look at any of the other neighbors who were watching because he had decided that the only way to walk out of his own front yard in handcuffs was to walk out of it exactly as he would have walked out of it without them, which is to say, straight and level and with the particular composure of a man who has been in genuinely bad situations and knows the difference between a situation that is temporarily uncomfortable and a situation that is actually dangerous. Gallagher pressed a heavy hand onto the top of Marcus's head to get him into the back of the cruiser harder than necessary, and Marcus ducked into the cage without comment, and the door closed with the heavy final sound of a thing being sealed. Through the rear window, Marcus watched 218 Birchwood Lane recede as the cruiser pulled away from the curb. The lights were off in the front. The smoker was still going in the back. The oak trees were doing their gold light thing in the late afternoon sun. The house looked exactly like what it was, a beautiful home on a quiet street purchased with years of discipline and sacrifice and a particular kind of hope. And it was standing there patiently waiting for its owner to come back, the way property waits for people without judgment or anxiety, simply holding the place until the person returns to fill it. Marcus leaned his head back against the hard plastic partition and closed his eyes, and he did not feel panic, and he did not feel despair, and he did not feel rage. Though all 3 of those would have been completely understandable given the circumstances. What he felt was the cold, clarifying focus of a man who has just watched an opponent make a catastrophic tactical error and understands with complete certainty exactly what comes next. The booking area of the Pinecrest District Station was the particular kind of institutional space that communicated through its flooring and its lighting, and the arrangement of its furniture that the people who passed through it were not expected to be comfortable and were not intended to feel that their presence here was anything other than a problem requiring processing. Desk Sergeant Lou Carver had worked this particular space for 22 years, which was long enough to have stopped noticing its specific ugliness and long enough to recognize immediately when something coming through the door was going to create paperwork he didn't want. Marcus Cole walked in, straight-backed and quiet, which was itself unusual enough to make Carver look twice, and Gallagher put the arrest report on the counter with the particular energy of a man who wants credit for something, and Carver started typing because that was what he did. He ran the address, 218 Birchwood Lane, Franklin County Property Records. The result came back in 11 seconds. He read it. He scrolled down. He read it again. The registered owner of 218 Birchwood Lane as of 19 days prior was Marcus James Cole. The deed transfer was clean. The VA loan notation was there, the seller's signature and the buyer's signature and the notary stamp were all exactly where they were supposed to be. There was also a flag on the file, a federal flag. the kind that came through when someone with a certain kind of military service record was attached to a property, a flag that Carver recognized from one previous occasion in 22 years. And that meant simply that the complete file was not available to local law enforcement without a specific request to a federal contact. Carver looked up at Gallagher. He said carefully and without inflection that the property records showed Marcus Cole as the current owner of record. He said the deed had been transferred 19 days ago. He said the federal flag on the file suggested a military background of some significance. Gallagher said the guy probably knew the owner's name. He said, "Run a background check." Carver ran the background check. It came back clean. No priors, no warrants, no flags of the criminal variety. Only the federal military flag sitting there quietly indicating that the man currently sitting on the booking bench had a service record that local law enforcement systems could not fully access. Marcus requested his phone call. Gallagher started to say something about earning privileges, and Carver cut him off and told him without particular drama, but with the finality of someone who had seen enough to know when a situation needed to stop getting worse to let the man make his call. Marcus dialed from memory. He had not stored this number in his phone because some numbers, the ones that mattered most, you keep in your head rather than in a device that can be taken from you. It was a Washington, D.C. area code. It rang twice. He said, "Raymond, it's Marcus Cole. I'm at the Pinecrest District Station, arrested for barbecuing in my own backyard. The arresting officer is Brett Gallagher. No warrant. Entered through a locked gate. False arrest, unlawful detention, civil rights violation. I need you here." He listened for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, the system is running." He handed the receiver back to Carver and returned to the booking bench and sat down with his hands on his knees and his back straight and his eyes closed, and Sergeant Carver watched him from behind the booking counter with the expression of a man who has just realized he is in the middle of something significantly larger than a Sunday evening shift. And Officer Brett Gallagher leaned against the far wall and crossed his arms and tried to project a confidence that was for the first time that evening not entirely convincing even to himself. Raymond Holloway had been a JAG officer for 6 years before he became a civil rights attorney, and the transition had been less a career change than a clarification of purpose in both roles. He was doing the same fundamental thing, which was using the specific machinery of the law to protect people who were being damaged by forces that believed themselves to be beyond accountability. He had been doing it for 28 years, and he was very good at it, and he did not waste his good at things that didn't deserve it. He and Marcus Cole had met in 2009 during a joint task force operation in which Holloway was the JAG representative and Marcus was the operational commander. And in the 72 hours of that operation, Holloway had watched Marcus direct 4 simultaneous moving pieces under conditions that would have produced chaos in a less disciplined mind. And he had come out of it with the kind of respect for another person that does not diminish with time or distance. They had stayed in contact not constantly, not intrusively, but with the consistency of men who consider each other reliable in the specific sense that matters, which is that when things go genuinely wrong, you can pick up the phone. Holloway was at his home office reviewing a filing deadline when Marcus called. He listened without interrupting. When Marcus had finished, 93 seconds, Holloway noted precise and complete, and entirely without self-pity, he asked one question. "Is the camera system operational?" Marcus said yes. Holloway said, "Don't say another word to anyone. I'll be there in 40 minutes. He made 2 calls on the way. The first was to Chief Donald Marsh, whose personal cell number he had and whom he informed in the particular tone of someone issuing a courtesy warning before a much less courteous process began, that his officer had just arrested the owner of the home he'd arrested him in, and that if the chief would like to be part of the solution, rather than the problem, he had approximately 45 minutes to make his way to the district station. The second call was to his associate, a young attorney named Jessica Vance, whom he asked to begin accessing the Franklin County Property Record System and the Pinecrest District Complaint Database simultaneously because he wanted to know exactly who Officer Brett Gallagher was before he walked through the station door. Jessica called back in 20 minutes with 11 complaints filed against Gallagher over 14 years. 9 of the 11 involved Black or Hispanic suspects. All 11 had been closed without disciplinary action by the same supervising sergeant. Holloway absorbed this information, filed it in the same careful internal space where he kept the things that were going to be useful, and pulled into the Pinecrest District parking lot at 6:21 in the evening. He sat in the car for 30 seconds, which was enough time to make a decision about how he was going to walk into that building, and then he got out and walked into that building. Raymond Holloway did not rush. He had learned over 28 years of legal work that involved a significant amount of walking into rooms where people did not want to see him. That the pace at which you moved communicated something important about how the room should receive you. And the message he wanted to communicate in this particular room was that he was not here because of an emergency, and he was not here in distress, and he was not here asking for anything. He was here because this was where a situation that he intended to resolve in a specific way required him to be, and he had all the time necessary to resolve it properly. He was 6'1" and wearing a charcoal gray suit that had cost considerably more than a police officer's monthly salary, and he carried a slim leather briefcase of the dark brown shade that communicated seriousness rather than flashiness. And he moved through the lobby of the Pinecrest District Station with the unhurried authority of a man who owns whatever room he walks into, not through aggression, but through the more durable form of presence that comes from knowing exactly what you're doing and why. Chief Donald Marsh was already there, having made the drive in 38 minutes, and his face as he stood near the booking counter communicated clearly that the dinner he'd left had not been worth leaving for this. He was a compact man in his late 50s with the kind of permanently tired expression that 25 years in law enforcement produces, and he turned when Holloway came through the door and extended his hand with the particular care of someone managing a situation. Holloway shook his hand. He glanced at Marcus, still sitting on the booking bench, back straight, hands on knees, eyes now open and tracking the room with a precision that several people in the station had already noticed and found faintly disconcerting without being able to articulate why. Marcus gave Holloway a single nod. Holloway gave him one back. Then Holloway set his briefcase on the booking counter, opened it, and removed a tablet. He didn't announce what he was about to show them. He didn't preface it with an explanation or a legal argument or a speech of any kind. He simply turned the tablet so that the screen faced the counter, and he pressed play. The video was 4K wide-angle with directional audio that had been optimized for a backyard environment, meaning it had filtered out ambient wind noise and enhanced voice frequencies. So what came out of the tablet's speakers was clear and immediate and entirely without ambiguity. The way a courtroom transcript is clear but somehow more visceral because you could see the faces and the body language and the hand on the holster before a single word had been exchanged. Gallagher was standing with his back partially to the camera when he said it. The audio caught it perfectly. "People like you don't just close on houses in Pinecrest." The words came out of the tablet speaker and went into the room and did not come back. Holloway watched Brett Gallagher watch the screen. He had watched a lot of people watch evidence of themselves in his career, and there was a specific sequence of internal events that almost always expressed itself the same way on the outside, regardless of the person. First, the detached, watching the slight distance of someone viewing footage that feels general rather than specific, and then the moment of recognition, the almost imperceptible change in muscle tension as the brain connects the image on the screen to the memory in the body. And then the second recognition, the slower and more devastating one, which is the understanding of what the footage means, not just as a record of what happened, but as a document that exists independently of whatever story the person on it intended to tell about themselves. Gallagher went through all 3 stages in approximately 20 seconds. Holloway watched him do it. The color left his face in a way that was distinct from the ordinary loss of color that comes from shock. It was more thorough than that, more complete, like watching a tide go out. His hands, which had been crossed over his chest in the posture of a man who is comfortable with his own authority, came apart and dropped to his sides, and one of them reached for the edge of the booking counter and found it and held it, not dramatically, just as a matter of structural necessity. Sergeant Lou Carver had stopped typing. The keyboard was silent. The only sounds in the room were the constant low mutter of the dispatch radio and the footage still playing on Holloway's tablet. Gallagher's voice, clear and captured and irrevocable, saying the things he had said in Marcus Cole's backyard as though he were the only person who would ever hear them. Chief Marsh watched the screen for another full minute after the relevant phrase. He watched Gallagher on camera refusing Pratt's suggestion to run the property records. He watched Gallagher step into Marcus's personal space. He watched Marcus stand perfectly still with his hands open and speak with a measured precision that made the contrast between the two men's conduct about as clear as anything Marsh had seen in 25 years. He watched the cuffs go on. He watched Marcus Cole, the owner of that home, be led across his own patio and out through his own gate. Then he looked at Gallagher, and Gallagher could not hold the look. Holloway closed the tablet. He said in the tone of someone issuing instructions rather than making requests, "I'll need the original arrest report, the complete radio log from this evening, beginning at 4:47 body cam footage from both officers and Sergeant Gallagher's full complaint history. I'll need all of it before I leave this building." He looked at Chief Marsh. "My client should be released immediately. The charges against him should be withdrawn formally and in writing tonight, not tomorrow morning. And I'd encourage you to have a conversation with Officer Gallagher about the next step in this process, because the next step is going to involve a federal civil rights filing that will name him personally. And qualified immunity is not going to apply to a clearly established Fourth Amendment curtilage violation, which this demonstrably is." Marsh nodded at Carver. Carver came around the counter with the key. The cuffs came off Marcus's wrists, and he stood up and rolled his shoulders back with the contained relief of someone releasing a tension they've been managing carefully. And Holloway crossed the room and took off his vest and placed it over Marcus's shoulders because the air conditioning in the booking area was aggressive and Marcus was wearing a thin cotton t-shirt, and Holloway was the kind of man who noticed practical things in impractical moments. Marcus and Gallagher were in the same room for the last time. Marcus looked at him once directly without the heat of anger or the performance of contempt, just the level assessing look of a man who has evaluated a situation and arrived at a clear conclusion about it. What he saw was not a monster. He had known monsters. He had been in rooms with men who would do violence for reasons he couldn't access with any part of his moral imagination. Gallagher was not that. Gallagher was something in some ways sadder, a man who had organized his entire understanding of the world around a belief that was wrong, and who had acted on that belief in a public and irrevocable way, and who was now standing in the wreckage of that action with no framework to make sense of it. Marcus did not feel sorry for him exactly, but he understood him in the distant and unsentimental way that you understand a mechanism that has broken down not with sympathy for the mechanism, but with clarity about what happened and why. He turned away. He and Holloway walked out of the Pinecrest District Station together into the early evening air, which smelled faintly but distinctly of hickory smoke drifting from the southeast from the direction Marcus noted, without surprise, of 218 Birchwood Lane, where the smoker was still running patient and faithful and completely unbothered by everything that had happened in the last 2 hours. Raymond Holloway sent the footage to 3 addresses simultaneously at 8:17 that evening. The first was the office of Franklin County District Attorney Patricia Nguyen with a cover memo outlining the specific federal statutes he intended to invoke. The second was the Pinecrest District Internal Affairs Unit with a formal complaint filed under the department's own procedures. The third was the personal email of Teresa Banks, an investigative reporter at Channel 9 News, whom Holloway had worked with twice before on matters involving law enforcement accountability, and who had a reputation for doing the work of actually verifying things before broadcasting them, which he valued in a journalist. By 8 o'clock the next morning, Chief Donald Marsh read a prepared statement to the assembled day shift confirming that Officer Brett Gallagher had been placed on unpaid administrative suspension, effective immediately pending an internal affairs investigation. He did not use the phrases alleged misconduct or "we take all complaints seriously." He used the phrase The footage speaks clearly, which was unusual enough in a police department context that 3 of the officers in the room exchanged looks. At 6 o'clock that evening, Teresa Banks opened her broadcast with 30 seconds of unedited audio from the backyard camera and the specific phrase that anchored the broadcast. "People, like you don't just close on houses in Pinecrest," went out over the air in Brett Gallagher's own voice without editing, without commentary, without any framing beyond the established facts of who owned the house and what Gallagher had been doing when he said it. The clip was shared 180,000 times in 4 hours. What struck people who engaged with it across a wide range of backgrounds and political affiliations was not primarily the phrase itself, but the context. The footage of a man standing beside his own smoker in his own backyard on a Sunday afternoon doing nothing alarming, doing nothing aggressive, doing nothing at all except existing in a space he had earned and paid for and had every legal right to occupy, being confronted by a police officer who had walked through his locked gate without announcement, without warrant, without anything except a phone call from a neighbor who had made an assumption. The simplicity of it was what made it undeniable. There was no ambiguity to argue about, no context that changed the meaning. No alternative interpretation that held up for more than a moment before collapsing under the weight of what the footage plainly showed. The police union met in emergency session 48 hours later. They had been in the position of defending indefensible footage before, and they had developed a reasonably reliable institutional instinct for the difference between a situation where they could build a credible defense and a situation where attempting to do so would cost them more than the officer they were defending. This was the second kind. They issued a statement expressing that the conduct shown in the footage did not reflect the values of the union and that they would not be providing legal representation in this matter. Gallagher received that information by phone call, sitting in the kitchen of the house he shared with his wife and 16-year-old daughter on a Tuesday morning, and when he hung up the phone, the kitchen was very quiet. 3 weeks after the Sunday afternoon on Birchwood Lane, the Internal Affairs investigation produced its findings, and the findings were, in the terminology of official documents, significant. In 14 years of service, Brett Gallagher had accumulated 11 formal complaints. 9 of the 11 involved Black or Latino men who had been stopped, detained, or arrested under circumstances that the complaining parties described as unprovoked or discriminatory. All 11 complaints had been closed without disciplinary action by the same supervising sergeant, a man named Walton, 20-year veteran, who is now the subject of a separate IA investigation and had been placed on administrative leave while that investigation proceeded. The IA findings documented something that looked, when you laid the 11 complaints side by side and read them in sequence, very much like a pattern that had been running undisturbed for a long time, sustained not by any single catastrophic event, but by 100 small accommodations and convenient closures, and the quiet institutional tendency to make problems disappear rather than address what was producing them. It was the IA investigator noted in language that would be read aloud in a federal courthouse 6 months later, a culture of tolerance for a particular kind of officer behavior that had been cultivated over many years by many people making many small choices, and Gallagher was its clearest expression. District Attorney Patricia Nguyen filed charges under Ohio Revised Code and federal statute official oppression, false imprisonment, and deprivation of rights under color of law. Gallagher retained a private attorney, a competent man named Fisher, who specialized in law enforcement defense cases using money from a savings account that had taken 12 years to build. The union's withdrawal of support had been complete and immediate, and Fisher's hourly rate was making the account move in the wrong direction with a speed that was difficult to look at directly. The calls Gallagher made to the 4 officers he considered his closest colleagues in the department went. Like this one said he was sorry but couldn't get involved. 2 didn't answer and didn't call back. And the 4th, a man named Greg Buell, who had ridden with Gallagher for 3 years, and with whom Gallagher had shared approximately 1,000 bad coffees and 1,000 conversations about everything that was wrong with the modern world, picked up once, said something brief about how the footage was what the footage was, and didn't answer again after that. At the dinner table that week, Gallagher's wife ate in silence, and his daughter, who was 16 and had seen the clip on her phone before either of her parents knew it existed, looked at the wall instead of at him when she passed the bread. He sat in the garage later that evening at the small folding table he'd always used for paperwork he brought home, and his badge was on the table in front of him, where he'd put it down when he'd come in. And he looked at it for a long time, with the specific expression of a man who is trying to understand how something he was certain of turned out not to be what he thought it was. Raymond Holloway filed the civil suit the following week. The named defendants were Brett Gallagher, individually the City of Pinecrest and the Police Department. The federal judge reviewing the qualified immunity question found in a ruling that took 11 pages, but arrived at its conclusion by the third that the law governing police intrusion into the curtilage of a private residence was clearly established, had been clearly established for decades, and that a 14-year law enforcement veteran could not reasonably claim ignorance of it. Qualified immunity was denied. Gallagher was personally liable. Margaret Clifton received a subpoena for her deposition on a Thursday morning delivered by a process server who arrived at her front door at 9 a.m. She stood in her doorway holding the document for a long time after the server left reading it, and then reading it again, and the geraniums on the second-floor balcony were visible from where she stood, and she did not go upstairs to tend them that day. The Internal Affairs interview room was a small, neutral space, not aggressively institutional, but not comfortable either, the specific temperature of a room designed to produce candor by eliminating the variables that allow people to feel either threatened or at ease. Danny Pratt sat at the table with his hands flat on the surface, which was something he'd read in a training manual about projecting openness, and which he was doing now, less as a technique and more as a way of keeping them still. He was 24 years old and had been a police officer for 4 months, and he understood clearly sitting in that room that what he said in the next hour would determine something important about who he was going to be, not just professionally, but in a more fundamental way that he couldn't fully articulate but felt with considerable weight. He told the investigator exactly what had happened. He did not embellish, and he did not minimize. He confirmed that Gallagher had gone to the side gate without attempting to contact the homeowner at the front door. He confirmed that he had suggested running the property records through the mobile terminal, and that Gallagher had refused. He confirmed that Gallagher had said, "People like you don't just close on houses in Pinecrest." He confirmed the exact words because he had been repeating them to himself since the moment they were said the way you repeat things you need to remember accurately. He confirmed that Marcus Cole had been calm, cooperative, non-threatening, and precise throughout the entire encounter, and had offered no physical resistance of any kind. When the investigator asked why he hadn't done more stop the arrest, called his supervisor, intervened in some more active way, Pratt was quiet for a moment before answering. He said he hadn't known how, and that the not knowing how was his problem to reckon with, and not something he could explain away, and that he intended to reckon with it. After the interview, he sat in his personal car in the parking lot for 20 minutes without starting the engine. He looked at the department building through the windshield and thought about what Marcus Cole had said to him at the gate on Birchwood Lane quietly, just between the two of them. Remember exactly what happened. And he had told it. And he knew that telling it accurately had cost Gallagher something significant, and had cost himself something too, some version of the comfort that comes from belonging solidly to one side of a line. He thought it was probably the right cost. He wasn't entirely sure yet. He thought he would be sure eventually. Internal Affairs recommended that Pratt receive remedial training and a formal letter of reprimand for failure to prevent an unlawful arrest. Marcus, through Holloway, submitted a written statement asking that the reprimand be reduced to a written counseling and that Pratt be given the opportunity to complete his probationary period. The request was granted. Danny Pratt kept his badge, was transferred to a different district, and carried the weight of a Sunday afternoon in May on Birchwood Lane with him into every subsequent shift not as trauma exactly, but as the kind of permanent, specific knowledge that changes how you see things permanently and without the option of reverting. The plea agreement Brett Gallagher signed 6 months after his arrest required him to surrender his badge and certifications permanently, forfeit his pension, 14 years of contributions gone, submit to 2 years of supervised probation, and accept a lifetime bar from any position of public authority or armed security work. He did not serve jail time, a fact that the internet had strong opinions about for approximately 2 weeks before moving on to other things, as the internet does. He found work at the Eastgate Mall in a suburb 40 minutes from Pinecrest as a private security officer for a company called SecureLink that contracted with retail tenants. The uniform was a dark navy blue that was similar enough to a police uniform to look in poor light, almost like the real thing, but different enough in material and fit and the absence of certain specific pieces of hardware. No gun, no badge, no authority beyond the ability to ask someone to leave, to make the distinction in good light entirely clear. His job was to walk the perimeter of the parking structure twice per shift and respond to calls from store managers about shoplifting or disturbances. He was supervised by an assistant operations manager named Denise Okafor, who was 29 years old and had a master's degree in business administration and ran the SecureLink contract at Eastgate with the focused efficiency of someone who had earned her position and intended to keep it. One evening in November, Gallagher responded to a call from a sporting goods store about a group of teenagers who were sitting on the benches outside the entrance and, according to the manager, making customers uncomfortable by their presence. When Gallagher arrived, the teenagers, 5 of them, 14 or 15, doing nothing except existing in a mall corridor on a weeknight, were no more alarming than teenagers generally are, which is to say moderately and contextually and mostly harmlessly. He had started to tell them they needed to move along when Denise Okafor appeared from the direction of the food court. She had received the same call, had walked over to assess, and had arrived to hear Gallagher using a tone that she recognized from a briefing the company had done about the specific kind of interaction that created liability. She said calmly, and without making a scene, that SecureLink's protocol for this type of situation was to determine if there was an actual policy violation before requesting anyone to leave, and that the teenagers were within the public accommodation area and had not violated any policy, and that if he had concerns about the tenor of his approach, he was welcome to log them with her at the end of shift. Gallagher looked at her. She looked back at him with the specific, steady directness of someone who has dealt with the full range of human difficulty and has learned not to blink first. He said, "Yes, ma'am," and he turned and walked his next perimeter loop, and the parking structure was quiet, and somewhere 40 minutes away at 218 Birchwood Lane in Pinecrest Estates, the lights were on in the study and the kitchen and the living room exactly as they should have been. Margaret Clifton's for sale sign appeared in the lawn at 216 Birchwood 8 months after the afternoon that had started with a phone call and ended with a subpoena. The defamation claim and the false report civil filing that Holloway had attached to the broader suit had not been designed to destroy her, but they had produced consequences that accumulated the neighborhood association's formal censure. The coverage in the local paper that attached her name to the call. The specific discomfort of being known on your own street as the person who had called the police on a man for existing in his own home. She sold at a price slightly below market value because she wanted to be gone more than she wanted to negotiate, and she went to live with her sister in a suburb of Cincinnati, and 216 Birchwood Lane went to a young couple with a baby who introduced themselves to Marcus over the fence on their second weekend there. 1 year and 3 weeks after the Sunday afternoon that had changed the shape of things on Birchwood Lane, Marcus Cole woke up at 5 in the morning on a Saturday and went to the kitchen and started the coffee and took the brisket he'd prepped the night before out of the refrigerator and carried it out to the patio in the early morning dark. The smoker had been waiting right where he'd left it. He got the charcoal going, added the hickory chunks, adjusted the airflow vents with the specific, unhurried care of a man who understands that you cannot rush the early part of this process any more than you can rush any process worth doing properly. And then he came inside and poured the first coffee of the day and stood at the back window in the not quite light of 6 a.m. and watched the first thin thread of smoke rise from the smoker and drift south across the yard. By 2 in the afternoon, the smell had done what hickory smoke does on a still day in a quiet neighborhood, which is travel further than you'd expect and tell everyone within range that something good is happening somewhere. Gerald Beaumont from 220 came over the fence at 2:15 with a six-pack of cold beer and the particular grin of a man who has been waiting for this occasion. The Delacroix family from the end of the block arrived with their kids at 3, the children immediately commandeering the yard in the way that children commandeer yards with complete authority and zero political awareness. Raymond Holloway arrived at 3:30 in a casual shirt that probably cost as much as his suit, carrying a bottle of something good. And Chief Donald Marsh arrived 15 minutes after that, having been invited by Holloway in a gesture that Marcus had thought about and decided was right, not to forgive what had happened exactly, but to establish what was supposed to happen instead, which was a police chief attending a cookout in a constituent's yard, which was what normal looked like. Marcus stood at the smoker with the stainless steel tongs in his right hand and the afternoon light doing the gold thing across his yard, which was full of people who had in their various ways been part of the story of how he came to be standing here, and he felt the particular deep satisfaction of a man who has arrived completely and without reservation at exactly where he intended to be. There was no formal moment, no speech, no gathering of people to say something meaningful about what the last year had represented. There was just the yard and the smoke and the laughter from somewhere near the back fence where the Delacroix kids had found something interesting, and Holloway and Marsh in a conversation that seemed from a distance to be going better than either of them had expected, and the brisket reading 203 degrees and 40 more minutes from done. Marcus had spent years in places where the ground beneath his feet could not be counted on to be the same tomorrow as it was today, where the continuity of any given moment into the next was a thing you hoped for rather than assumed. What he felt standing in his backyard on a May afternoon with his neighbors in his yard and his smoker doing its slow, faithful work was the specific grounded permanence of a thing that was his, not claimed, not borrowed, not contingent on anyone else's assessment of whether he belonged here, but owned, documented, purchased with years of discipline and sacrifice and a kind of deliberate, long-sighted hope that had turned out to be justified. The hickory smoke rose into the blue Ohio sky and drifted south across the fence line and kept going the way smoke does, indifferent to property lines, and past events carrying the smell of something good being done right across the quiet rooftops of Pinecrest Estates. The brisket was ready at 4:17. It was, by any honest accounting, extraordinary. Justice, when it comes, does not always announce itself with ceremony. Sometimes it looks like a yard full of neighbors on a Saturday afternoon and smoke rising from a patio and a man standing on his own ground with absolutely nothing to prove and nowhere else to be. Marcus Cole served 2 combat tours for a country that took nearly 48 hours to acknowledge he had the right to grill in his own backyard. He did not fight for recognition. He fought for accountability, and he got it, and then he came home and started the smoker. If this story stayed with you, if you saw something in it that mattered, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Every week, someone has waited for the system to simply work the way it's supposed to. Every week, someone has called for help and received the opposite of what they needed. Subscribe to our channel and we'll keep telling the stories that deserve to be told, because these stories matter and so do the people in them. What would you have done if you heard that gate open? Tell us in the comments.